Okay, let's go through some applications now. Now, for these applications, the directions say set up a system of equations, then use the calculator to solve the system, and then we're going to interpret and write our answers in complete sentences. So, this is an example of how it would be written when I want you to use your calculator to solve your system of equations. So in example 1, it says 3 even numbers add up to 144. The smaller is half the larger, and the middle number is 3/4 the larger number. What are the three numbers? So this helps us figure out how to define our variables. The last sentence, it says, what are the three numbers? So whatever it is that they're asking you to find, that's what you want to use to set up your variables. So we're going to set up our variables to be the three numbers. So let's let the smallest number be x, the middle number be y, and then the larger number be z. Now it gives us information in the problem so that we can figure out how to set up our system of equations. It says 3 even numbers add up to 144. So all of these numbers are going to add up to 144. So that means my first equation is going to be x plus y plus z is equal to 144. The next clue says the smaller number is half the larger number. Since the larger number is z, the smaller number is going to be half of z. It says the middle number is 3/4 of the larger number. So y is going to be 3/4 z. So we can use this information here to come up with our second and third equation. This actually is an equation, and this is actually an equation, but we have to do a little bit of work to set it up so that we have our x, y, z's, and constants lined up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the x equals 1/2 z, and I'm going to subtract 1/2 z from both sides, and so I can line up my coefficients. I want my x, y's, and z's to be on the same side, and then my constants on the other. So when I subtract 1/2 z from both sides, I'm going to get x and minus 1/2 z is equal to 0. Now, so that we don't make a mistake when we enter this in on the calculator, I'm actually going to put in here that I have 0y. So I remember that my coefficient for y here is 0. I don't have any y's here. My coefficient for x is 1. My coefficient for y is 0, and my coefficient for z is -1/2, and then here is my constant. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with this equation here. I'm going to set it up so that I can use that to make my equation 3. I'm going to subtract the 3/4 z to one side, so I have all my x, y's, and z's on one side and my constant on the other. So when I subtract 3/4 z from both sides, I'm going to get 1y minus 3/4 z is equal to 0. And now I'm going to put in a 0x there, so I remind myself that my coefficient for x there is 0 because I don't have any. And then for y, my coefficient is 1. And then for z, my coefficient is -3/4, and then here's my constant. So I'm using these two equations here. I'm just rewriting them so that all my x's, y's, and z's are lined up. And in the case where I don't have a particular variable, I just stick a 0 in front of it as my coefficient. Okay, so now open up your app and put in your coefficients. So make sure that your settings are correct. You want a system of 3 by 3. You want 3 equations and 3 unknowns. And when you put in your matrix, your coefficients, across the first equation, you're going to have the coefficients 1, 1, 1, 144. Then for the second equation, you'll have the coefficients 1, 0, negative a half, 0. And then for the third equation, you're going to have the coefficient 0, 1, negative 3/4, and 0. Now, to put a fraction in the matrix, you can literally just put in negative. Make sure you use the negative button and not the minus. And then you can just literally put in 3 divided by 4, and it will change it to a decimal for you. Use the division symbol as your fraction bar. Now, when you get your solution, it's going to tell you that your x is 32, your y is 48, and your z is 64. So that means 32 is your first number, your 48 is the second number, and z is equal to 64 is your third number, which is the largest. So your final answer, written in a complete sentence, might be the three numbers are 32, 48, 64. In example 2, your roommate Sarah offered to buy groceries for you and your other roommate. The total bill was $58, and she forgot to save the individual receipts, but remember that your groceries were 5 cents cheaper than half of her groceries, and that your other roommate's groceries were $2.70 more than your groceries. How much was each of your share of the groceries? So this last question, again, is going to help us determine how to set up our variables. Whatever it's asking us to find, that's what we want to use to set up our variables. So we need to set up the variables so that each variable represents one person's share. So let's let X be Sarah's amount. Let's let Y be your amount. And let's let Z be the other roommate's groceries. Okay, now we're going to use the clues that they give us in the problem to come up with the 3 equations. So it says that the total bill was $58. That means if I add up all 3 amounts, that should total to 58. So our first equation is x plus y plus z is equal to $58. Now it also tells us that your groceries were 5 cents cheaper than half of hers, meaning Sarah's. So your amount is going to be half of Sarah's, and then 5 cents cheaper, so I'm going to subtract 5 cents. So what I'm going to do for the second equation, I'm going to take this and put all my x, y's, and z's on one side and my constant on the other. Notice in this equation we don't have a z, so that means my coefficient for z is going to be 0. I have 0 z's. That way we have that spot lined up in our system. So when I subtract 1/2 x from both sides, that gives me a negative 1/2 x plus y plus 0z, and on the right-hand side, I'm left with my constant negative 0.05. It says the other roommate's groceries were $2.70 more than your groceries. So that's going to be, since your groceries is y, then you're just going to add $2.70 to that. So I'm going to take this equation and rearrange it so that it's in order and everything is lined up in my system. In this equation, I don't have an x. So I'm going to have a coefficient of 0x. I'm going to subtract y from both sides. So that's going to give me a minus y plus z. And then my constant on the right will still be 270. So now I'm going to solve this using my app. When I put in the matrix, my coefficients, I'm going to have a 1, 1, 1, and then 58 for my first line of coefficients. Then I'm going to put in negative a half, 1, 0, and negative 0.05 for my second line. And then I'm going to put in 0, negative 1, positive 1, and 270 for my third line. Okay, my final answer is going to be that X is $27.70. So that's Sarah's amount. So I'm going to write down that Sarah's cost of groceries would be $27.70. It says Y is $13.80. That's my amount, or I should say your amount, according to the way we wrote this down. So your amount will be $13.80. And then the other roommate's amount, which is a Z, is $16.50. So the other roommate's amount is $16.50. Okay, in example 3, it says you inherit $1 million. You invest it in all 3 accounts for 1 year. The first account pays 2% interest each year. The second account pays 6% each year, and the third account pays 3% each year. After 1 year, you earn $50,500 in interest. If you invest 4 times the money into the account that pays 2% as compared to 3%, how much did you invest in each account? That is a lot of information to be thrown at you at once, and it can be a little overwhelming, and that's totally normal. What you want to do is, first of all, read the last sentence again so that you understand what you're looking for. The last sentence will almost always be a question that will ask you directly what you're supposed to find. And in this one, it says, how much did you invest in each account? So we have 3 accounts, so our variables are going to be the amount that's invested in each account. So let's let X be the dollar amount that's invested at the 2% interest. Let Y be the amount that's invested in the 3%. And let Z be the amount that is invested at 6%. And then we're going to go back and we're going to have to read it again to pick out the information to set up our equations. Don't be afraid to read the problem 5 times if you have to. A lot of people get overwhelmed and just stop after you read it the first time. Reading math is not like reading a novel. It's not like you can just read through the paragraph and understand what's going on the first time. Sometimes you have to read it multiple times to take in all the information. Okay, so let's go back and pick out the information that we need to set up the equation. Okay, so it says you inherit $1 million. So I know the total that's split up between all those accounts is $1 million. And it says you invest it in all 3 accounts. So that means if I add up all of those accounts, it should be $1 million. So that will be our first equation. X plus Y plus Z is going to be $1 million. Now it says the first account pays 2%, the second account pays 6%, and then the third account pays 3%. and you earn, after 1 year, $50,500 in interest. So that means if I take 2% of the amount invested in the X account, 3% of Y, and 6% of Z, those are my interest values. And if I take the percentage times the X, Y, and Z and add it up, that should give me the total interest of $50,500. So I'm going to take 2% of X plus 3% of Y plus 6% of Z, and that should give me the total of all the interest for all the accounts, which would give me $50,500. Okay, the last piece of information that's given to us, it says we're investing 4 times the amount of money in the account that pays 2% compared to 3%. So my equation is going to be set up so that I have 4y is equal to x. I'm going to have to rewrite that. So that the x's and y's are together on one side and my constant on the other. So when I rewrite that, I get minus x, because I'm going to subtract x from both sides, plus 4y. I have no z here, so that would be a plus 0z is equal to 0. So this rewritten so that my x, y's, and z's are all lined up would be this. So now I can put this in on my app, and I'm going to put in for my coefficients for the first equation as 1, 1, 1, and then 1 million. And then my second line, my coefficients will be 0.02, 0.03, 0.06, and 50,500. And then for the third line, I would have a -1, +4, 0, and 0. Okay, when I do that, I get that x is 200,000. So I would say the amount invested at 2% is 200,000. I get y is 50,000. So I would say the amount invested at 3% is 50,000. And then the last value, z, which is the amount invested at 6%, will be 750,000. So this would be my final answer.